there may be some background noise. We do have a chat box feature, so if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to type them in. I do suggest that you ask your questions at the end of the presentation so we can remain on track during the webinar. We do have a link on the event registration page, so you're able to obtain a quote for cyber insurance. And we will be here for you to answer any of the questions after the webinar as well. I'm going to share a bit with you about First Foundation. At First Foundation, our mission is to help people own valuable assets, grow in wisdom and wealth, and protect themselves and their loved ones. With the topic of cyber coverage today, we want to also make sure that your businesses are adequately covered as well. I want to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors, Automatica and Slate Insurance. So now I'm going to pass this over to Daryl Huff at Automatica, who's a sponsor for this event. Daryl?
Thank you for the kind introduction, Fawn. Good afternoon. My name is Daryl Huff, and I'm the BD manager for Automatica Technology Solutions. We work with Edmonton and area businesses by managing their IT services, including troubleshooting, help desk, network management, data backup, and recovery systems. It's vital to protect our customers from unnecessary downtime and malicious intent. We're constantly hearing stories of businesses being negatively impacted by hackers, crypto locker, and ransomware. Hopefully this never happens to you. However, should there be a data breach, it's important to know you have a robust policy in place that will protect your business. That is why we support Coalition and First Foundation, and look forward to learning more about this today and on the webinar. Should you have any questions for myself, Fawn will provide my contact information. I'd be happy to connect with you later. I'll pass this on to Jen Perry from First Foundation.
Hey, thanks so much, Daryl and Fawn, and for getting this thing started. My name is Jen Perry, and I manage the First Foundation insurance operations here in Edmonton. Just wanted to thank everyone for taking a moment out of your day to join us for this Coalition Cyber webinar. You're going to hear about some stories today that should cause you as a business owner to be cautious of what is going on in the world today and just see the need for a proper IT solution service as well as a proper insurance solution. For those of you who know me, one of the things I get extremely passionate about is our clients and how to better protect one of their most valuable assets to them, and that is their business. When First Foundation first heard about Coalition, we reviewed the product extensively, and we immediately knew there were gaps in our own insurance coverage. And that made us really excited to partner with someone that was taking a forward-thinking approach to cyber insurance. So without further ado, I want to pass it over to George from Coalition. George has over 25 years of experience in the property and casualty insurance world, and he's the head of Coalition's Canadian development, and he's here to present on how to solve the cyber risk in today's marketplace. Take it away, George.
Thanks for that intro, Jen. Hello, everyone. On behalf of the entire Coalition team, we appreciate the invitation from Gordon, Jen, and the First Foundation team to allow us the opportunity to speak to you today regarding one of the most pervasive risks facing companies today, notably cyber risks and specifically ransomware. Joining me today are my two colleagues. We have Shelley Ma. Shelley possesses a tremendous breadth of expertise in cyber investigations. As an NC certified examiner, the depth of her experience lies within complex breach investigations, computer forensics, and incident response. Since 2014, Shelley has analyzed, responded to, and investigated over 750 cases, has received numerous recognitions for her work, and is a highly sought-after presenter and public speaker on cyber-related topics. She specializes in network intrusion, investigations, litigation forensics, intellectual property theft, and related crimes. Joining her today is not Rich Gatz. I know the slide shows that. Unfortunately, Rich is in the midst of a major power outage in the Midwest in the US, so he has no access to his computer. But I'm happy to report Dale Schulenberg, his colleague and mine, is able to join in. Dale, too, is part of our claims team and legal counsel. He joined Coalition in 2020. Prior to joining Coalition, Dale spent the past 8 years at Clyde & Company, Etheria Law, handling complex claims for multiple carriers with a focus on the London market. He has in-depth experience reviewing and evaluating claims across several policy forms in the professional liability and tech cyber media lines. He works with insureds to quickly respond to incidents and bring them to a swift closure. He's been involved in some of the recent mega breaches, which included dealing with the breach response and litigation aspects of the incident. So with that, again, just in terms of general housekeeping, for those unfamiliar with Google Meets, you could certainly raise your hand or use the chat feature. In the interest of time, we will defer the questions till the end of the presentation, the formal presentation, and we'll endeavor to get to everyone's questions. As far as an agenda, we hope to provide little context and answer the question who Coalition is, and then we're going to get into a discussion of ransomware claims by the numbers, giving you some of these troubling statistics that continue to escalate today. Then we're going to walk you through an actual demo of a ransomware attack. Following that, we'll talk about the incident timeline and what our coverages afford our policyholders. And then finally, we want to share with you and leave with you some recommendations on how to prevent ransomware. So let's try to answer the question, who is Coalition? And to better understand who we are, you'd have to look no further than our two co-founders. Coalition was founded by two technology innovators and serial entrepreneurs who are considered by many as leading cybersecurity experts. One individual, his name is John Herring. He serves as our general partner or board member. He's effectively a silent partner within Coalition. He was previously the founder of Lookout, a privately held company valued at about $2 billion. They're one of the largest mobile security networks in the US. The other co-founder is our CEO, Joshua Mata. As pointed out, I've been in this business for almost 30 years in various roles. I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of great, bright minds in and outside of insurance. But I can say without question, Joshua Mata is one of the most intelligent individuals I've had the privilege of working with. Just to give you a sense of his background, at the age of 15, Josh began his career at Microsoft, where he sold his first software, becoming the company's youngest employee to date. He was often referred to within Microsoft as the boy wonder. Post 9/11, Josh was recruited straight out of high school by the CIA to work within their offensive cyber operations group. And while Josh studied at the University of Chicago and worked at the CIA, he had a 100% success rate infiltrating computer networks. Following university, Josh spent over 5 years as an investor and advisor in the private equity banking sector, including a position within London office of Goldman Sachs. So not only is he well respected in cybersecurity, he's very astute in finance and investment. Following his tenure in the UK, Josh circled back into the cybersecurity space, where he helped start and exponentially grow a company called Cloudflare. They're the world's largest DDoS mitigation service. When the company went public in the fall of 2019, they had a market valuation of $5 billion. So as evidence, both these co-founders are serial entrepreneurs. They've done exceedingly well at a very young age, which begs the question, why start Coalition? Well, both Josh and John were troubled by what was happening in society. We hear about it almost daily, and that is, despite over $100 billion in annual global spending by consumers and businesses on cybersecurity to defend themselves, the problem continues to escalate. Cyber attacks and tech failures are expected to trigger over $1 trillion in recovery costs globally. And unfortunately, as many of you know, most of those are borne by the victims. So both Josh and John realized that cybersecurity is not a technology problem so much as it is a risk management problem. And that's why they set out to build Coalition. They wanted to help companies such as yours manage what has become the most pervasive and increasingly severe risks you may face, and offer a financial product in the form of insurance that, when combined with cybersecurity software and services, not only helps prevent and mitigate risks, but helps organizations recover from losses when they occur. So the company officially launched, they're based out of San Fran, in January 2018 with 10 employees and an ambitious mission to solve cyber risks. If you were to look at our total gross written premium at the end of 2020, Coalition would rank amongst the top 10 global cyber markets, and that's after only 3 short years of being in existence. We took our first step in global expansion when the company launched in Canada in May of 2020. We're backed by Swiss Re and Arch. Swiss, for those that aren't familiar with Swiss Re, they're one of the world's largest reinsurers. So we have the strong financial backing, and they write 100% of the risk domiciled in Canada. And we can offer clients with revenues up to $1 billion the ability to write limits up to $20 million across all insuring agreements, including social engineering, bodily injury, property damage, and pollution-related coverage. Finally, to date, as evidenced in the slide, Coalition has raised over $300 million US in venture cap private equity from a number of highly prominent players, including Ribbit Capital, VY Capital, Valor Equity Partners, Index Ventures, amongst others. And last year, it was announced by Forbes magazine that Coalition ranked among the fastest growing venture-backed startups most likely to reach $1 billion valuation or unicorn status. Well, just a month or so ago, we announced our latest round of funding, which put our valuation at $1.7 billion. So with that as a backdrop, I will now pass it over to my colleague, Shelley Ma.
Always appreciate the overview, George. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shelley Ma. I'm the Incident Response Lead at Coalition based in Toronto. It's certainly a pleasure to be here today. And I'm looking forward to diving into this topic of ransomware, which, as we all know, is the #1 threat that's overshadowing the cyber landscape today. So let's kick things off here. Next slide, George. Thank you. I'm pretty sure that at this stage of the game, ransomware doesn't need too much of an introduction given how often we see it in the media. But as a quick recap, ransomware is effectively a type of malware that is designed to encrypt digital files or entire disks, making them inaccessible to the user. The encryption by ransomware should theoretically be reversible. So typically you contact the attacker, you pay a ransom, and you acquire the decryption key. The goal of a ransomware actor is to render the entirety of a network, or at least a significant portion of it, completely inoperable so that it can greatly disrupt business. And, as an IR lead, I see this day in, day out, where ransomware can entirely corrupt the operations of a company. And the reason it's so widespread among cybercriminals is because ransomware offers an immediate monetization of the cyber event. Next slide. So the immediate monetization of the attack is a very appealing quality of ransomware to cybercriminals. The other reason it's so popular and successful today is because of how easy it is to get your hands on ransomware from dark web marketplaces. So for the most part, ransomware is distributed on a type of platform. This platform we call Ransomware as a Service, or RaaS. What this is effectively is it's a pyramid scheme. So it's a pyramid scheme-like business model whereby the ringleaders at the top of the pyramid gets a cut of every ransom that is propagated by the mercenaries at the bottom of the pyramid. So the real geniuses are the guys that sit at the top of the pyramid, and anybody can really get their hands on ransomware from the black market and then exploit and run it. And then the ringleaders at the top would get a portion of that profit. Ransom demands have been steadily increasing over the years. They can be very extravagant, as you can see in that last column on the right. As a measure of comparison, I always like to provide some background information on the evolution of ransoms as I've encountered them. So I first started responding to ransomware in early 2016. Excuse me. In early 2016. And at that time, ransomware was still quite nascent. The very first ransom I paid was 1 Bitcoin. So that was just $300 US. At that time, my company, we had no idea how to actually purchase Bitcoins. So we found a dealer on a random exchange website that only accepted cash. So we had to put the bills in a brown paper bag and literally met up with a guy on the street corners of downtown San Francisco. And then after he finished counting the bills, he transferred the Bitcoins to us via his iPad. So it was super dodgy. Thankfully, since then, purchasing cryptocurrency has become way more conventional, but so has ransomware. The largest ransom that I had handled by 2017 was $50,000. And then by 2018, we started to see $300,000, $400,000. And now it's not entirely uncommon to see ransoms in the millions. The largest ransom that I've personally dealt with to date was $10 million. But I have seen ransoms as of recent in the $40 million range. So they're getting really high. Next slide, please. Paying the ransom is always the last option. There's a multitude of other recovery methods that we can explore before that point. At Coalition, we pay the ransom on behalf of the insured. So from 2020 to 2021, we saw a marked 47% increase in the severity of ransomware. Tying this into a broader statistic, from 2019 to 2020, we actually saw a 153% increase in the severity of ransomware attacks. So we believe that this was an impact of COVID, likely due to the change in security and structure, and it all been very much tested due to the remote working situation. So attackers are becoming increasingly more aggressive. They're putting in much more effort into their attacks, and there's definitely costs associated with that. And we're now dealing with attackers that even call their victims on the phone. Next slide. This is an example of a typical ransom note. So ransom notes are automatically dropped on the infected system after the encryption kicks off. The ransom notes range from generic to very artistic, very creative. I've seen like Street Fighter themed ransom notes. Often they contain poorly translated English and instructions to contact the threat actor. The common modes of communication are usually via email. Sometimes it's via the Onion router or the Tor browser, and that is how you access the dark web. We can also communicate with them sometimes through instant messaging. And like I said, now they also call you on the phone, which, trust me when I say, it's not a fun experience at all. Next slide. This is another example of a pretty common ransom note. They often contain some information on the extent of the encryption and the infection as well. Like here, they specify that the backups were impacted, so restoration would not be easily possible. And they would also instruct the victim not to engage with third-party response firms or IT. Next slide. So about 5 years ago, when ransomware excuse me. This is okay. So I forgot that I had included this ransom note. The reason I included this ransom note is they have like this frequently asked questions section, which I thought was quite interesting. I especially like the point 3 down there, which is like, what do you tell my boss? And then, the answer is protect your system, amigo. So ransom notes come in many shapes and flavors, but they're all meant to threaten the victim and minimally instruct them on the next steps. Next slide. So 5 years ago, when ransomware first came onto the scene, a ransomware incident rarely equated with an actual data breach because it was solely an encryption event, not a data theft event. Even when remote access became the primary vector of intrusion, it was very rare to observe actual theft of data during a ransomware event. We found through forensics that there were all sorts of reasons someone may have wanted access to your device, and it wasn't just to steal your data. So we've observed attackers using victims' computers to mine cryptocurrency. We've seen them use victim servers as an additional layer of anonymity to hack other victims. We've seen them running scam campaigns to try and extort money. And they would also use stolen credit cards or PayPal credentials to purchase online items. However, in late 2019, the game sort of changed. The bandwagon was propelled by a ransomware group named Maze. Maze was different in that they possessed definitive proof that they exfiltrated data. They threatened to release the stolen data should the victim choose not to pay the ransom. They knew the revenue or the worth of their victim. And so the ransom demands were very exorbitant, to say the least, and they weren't very amenable to negotiations. So the implications of data exfiltration or data theft, in addition to encryption, are very significant because regardless of whether the ransomware actors post the exfiltrated data, the bottom line is data still went out the door, which of course has legal ramifications. We have to exhaust a multitude of forensic avenues to extrapolate the population of items that were taken. For example, how many people's social insurance numbers are out there, how many people's private health information is out there, and sometimes that's not even completely doable in terms of determining exactly what was stolen. And as a last resort, we may have to do a dark web search for stolen contents. Next slide. Now, for a small demo, let's look at what an active ransomware encryption event looks like. So ransomware actors are way more sophisticated now, so they tend to come into the network in a more stealthy manner. But let's say, for argument's sake, that this user accidentally downloaded a malicious email attachment that has an embedded ransomware executable, and then they inadvertently click on it. So there you go. Right away, you can see that all the files are encrypted. An obvious sign is that at the ends of the files, they are appended with some sort of gibberish string. The wallpaper in this case is altered to reflect that an actual event a ransomware event has taken place. A ransom note gets dropped, and this block of random text there is the encryption key. And it's a unique identifier that attackers use to distinguish among the victims. The mode of communication that is specified in this ransom note is the Tor browser for the dark web. So they likely have already set up a platform on the dark web to communicate with you. Oftentimes, when threat actors set up a dark web page for a victim, a timer is triggered when you access the page, and it'll tell you that you only have X number of hours or X number of days to pay a ransom. The added time pressure is to strong arm the victim to front the ransom, of course. If you try and open a file, you'll see that Windows doesn't recognize it and won't know what to do. They're all appended, all of these files, you can see they're appended with the ransomware extension. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, here is where I'm going to turn it over to Dale.
Hi, everyone. So we're going to take a look at the incident timeline and cyber insurance coverage that comes with it. So this is just a general timeline of how a claim would look. And so, you have a security concern as a policyholder, and or you may have received an alert from Coalition, which is something that Coalition does. We have scanning capabilities, and we are constantly looking for different vulnerabilities that happen. And so we will alert our policyholders because we want you to be secure as possible as well. So it's a security concern. We want you to report that right away if it's on your end, or if we contact you, it's better if you get in touch with us as soon as possible. We can talk about that a little bit later. There's the assessment. It comes to Coalition, a member of the claims team, such as myself, that takes a look at the notice. And we'll start taking a look at a few different things as indicated here. There's some indicators that we do look for. Logins to email, whether or not they're legitimate or suspicious, whether password changes, have you made password changes? Were new accounts created? Are there malicious email headers? We'll take a look at a few other things as well, in particular in regards to ransomware. Do you have RDP open? Have you taken your networks, your systems off the network? Things like that. If it is determined that we need to move forward with forensics, we do have CIR. That's where Shelley comes from. Or we do, of course, have third-party vendors that we have on our panel that we can put you in touch with to do a forensic investigation. And then there's the recovery piece. We just help you get back up and running as quickly as possible, and we'll make we'll make payments based on the claims expenses that have gone through. If we go to the next slide, we'll start ticking each one a little more in depth. So the security concern we talked about, I had mentioned a little bit about these scans that we do. For example, there was a Microsoft Exchange vulnerability that came out in March. We happened to go through our policyholder book. We did some scans. People such as Shelley got on the phone with policyholders and helped them mitigate any type of vulnerability that came out through that. And we were able to get policyholders all the way patched up, and we were able to head off some actual claims that could have taken place as a result of that. We did end up having one or two claims that ransomware actually came in through the Exchange vulnerability. And so this is just kind of shows you some of the stuff that we're able to pull in. Assessment, again, I kind of talked about this a little bit, but the claims team member, you'll get on the phone right away with a claims team member, either through the hotline. If you call our hotline, it goes directly to our cell phones. We have 5 people on the team. It goes to all of our cell phones, and one of us is going to pick up. and either talk to you right away, talk to your broker right away, or if it came in through email, we'll reach out and get in touch with you as soon as possible. Next slide. So on the forensics, I talked about CIR. They're definitely available. They're part of our policyholder benefit. You will end up, if you are able to go with CIR, there's a $0 retention so that you, as a policyholder, are not having to make any payments towards CIR fees. If for some reason we're not able to use CIR, or you have a vendor that you prefer to use, we can work with that as well. But we do have a panel that we've worked out great rates with. We've vetted them through CIR and through myself, and we've worked out some different fixed priced templates and proposals that we are able to utilize. So we're able to also keep your costs down, but you're still getting first-rate service. And then on the next slide. So recovery, Shelly mentioned this a bit, but when it comes to actually making ransomware payments, we pay on behalf. And by we, it's coalition. You're not having to be out that ransomware payment if it comes to that piece. We also are pay on behalf for forensic cost, breach counsel cost. Breach counsel comes into play if you do happen to have a breach or through ransomware that data is exfiltrated, as Shelly had mentioned, you may have some notification obligations. So we have breach counsel on panel that we would put you in touch with. They'd be able to assist you with that. We make payments for them. Of course, this is all, unless it's CIR, excess of your retention, and that depends by policy. But we do that, and we want you to get up and running as quickly as possible. So we're working with you hand in hand throughout this whole process. Next slide. So what does insurance cover? We've kind of gone through this. And George, were you going to jump in here?
I may, if you'd like, sure. And if there are any specific questions, obviously the folks at First Foundation would also be able to assist you in your specific case for those on the line. But so typically, Dale, we go through this, but these are some of the areas of our policy that would be triggered in the event of a ransomware claim. So cyber extortion, these are costs to respond to the incident itself, up to and including the payment of the ransom. Breach response, as Dale alluded to, these are costs to respond to a breach, including third-party incident response and public relation experts, customer notification costs, credit monitoring, and so on. And finally, and not to be overlooked, a key contributing or byproduct, if you will, of a ransomware is business interruption costs and extra expenses that may be incurred by your in the event of a ransomware. So financial losses resulting from a failure in your security, data breach, or even systems failure. So those are covered off in our policy. We also offer crisis management coverage. So these are voluntary notification costs. Even if no personal identifiable information was accessed, but the clients want to provide notification or credit monitoring service to their customer. And as well, digital asset restoration, as evidenced on the screen there, cost to help recover or recreate any digital assets that have been destroyed via the encryption or the decryption process of the ransomware event itself would be covered. Okay. I'll pass it over to, is it Shelly on this one? Sorry, I should know this, but I believe it is.
Nope, that's me.
Still Dale. Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah. Well, thank you for walking us through the claims process, George, Dale. I think it really emphasizes the significance of being security conscious and limiting exposure as much as possible so that you can avoid a claims process altogether. I always say, the best claims process is to not go through one. As you can imagine, recovering from ransomware can be very arduous. So let's spend the last 2 slides just talking about some easy prevention mechanisms that you can implement to avoid being a low-hanging fruit to ransomware. So I will say that in my 6 years working in incident response, I've heard many times that entities don't think they're a target. However, with the ongoing reliance on technology and the ease for a cyber attacker, the key is not relying upon not thinking you are a target, but to harden your security enough so that you become less likely a target. So there are 6 basic approaches that lessen your likelihood of becoming the next target. And if you do become the next one, how do you recover faster? First and foremost, one of the best things you can do for your security posture is to turn on multi-factor authentication, also known as two-factor authentication. So definitely turn this on for all business critical services, especially email, which is usually the starting point for a threat actor. Disable what we call RDP access. So definitely get in touch with your IT team and advise them to close off remote desktop protocol if that is active. Remote desktop protocol is a built-in Windows feature that allows users to remotely access their servers and their file shares and their infrastructure. It's very neat, it's very handy, but it's not secure. And it is by far the most common method of entry for low-level ransomware attacks. Having RDP enabled to the public is literally the same as leaving your front door wide open with a sign outside that says everyone is welcome. Come steal my stuff. That's pretty much the same. If your organization absolutely requires remote access, consider securing it behind a virtual private network, a VPN, or consider alternatives to remote access. Implement security awareness training. We have a saying in the cybersecurity industry that's the weakest link in the chain is what's sitting behind the keyboard. Human error accounts for 60% of coalition's claims. So clicking on a bad link, opening a bad attachment, visiting a website that you shouldn't be visiting, especially not on your work laptop, falling for social engineering scams, the list goes on. Ensure employees are vigilant, that they're trained up on how to recognize fishy activities and how to protect themselves, as well as what to do in a cyber event. And it could literally be as simple as, if you get a request for a wire transfer, pick up the phone and call the person that you're sending the money to. Things as easy as that. Okay, next slide. Right, speaking of which, report early and report often. Time is of the essence in a ransomware response effort, and it can literally make or break the salvaging of business operations. This is why it's fundamental to have an incident response plan that is not only routinely updated, but it is also drilled and it is also practiced. Establish routine backups. The only saving grace to a fully fledged ransomware catastrophe is backups. Ensure that backups are not only present, that they exist, but also that data is backed up at appropriate intervals, preferably nightly. Time and time again, when I respond to incidents, we would get clients that have backups, they exist, but the last viable backup was from 3 months ago. So it simply won't suffice today. Ensure that backups are completely off-site and that they're disconnected from the primary network. This is very important. When I run into issues with backups, this is the number one issue. Clients would have backups, but they're connected to the rest of the network. So obviously, should the ransomware impact the network, if backups are connected, they would also be hit with the same encryption. And finally, ensure that backups are valid and that your team knows how to restore from backups in a timely manner so as to minimize business interruptions. This is another very important point. There's been times when the client would have backups. The backups are valid, but the team has no idea how to restore to the backups, or it's very badly or poorly organized and they don't know which server is backed up where. And so that creates a situation where potentially it could take up to a month just to restore all of the data. And it will be quicker to just pay for the decryption tool that will take 24 to 48 hours to decrypt everything. So having viable backups that are, appropriately backed up at correct intervals that the team knows how to handle in an emergency situation is very critical to adequate response efforts. And lastly, ensure proper data hygiene. And this basically means knowing where the data resides, especially mission critical data. So a lot of the times, during an active ransomware event, it's very, very stressful. And that stress is compounded when the team doesn't know where the important data is. So what do we need to decrypt or restore first so that some operations can resume? What devices do we need to examine if data theft or exfiltration occurred? Like, which devices has personal identifiable information, which device holds the health information, HR data, financial data, things like that. A solid inventory is needed to ensure a smooth and timely response effort. Okay, so these are just some of the very easy steps to implement to improve your cyber risk. It's quick, it's easy to install, and of course, if you want to really get robust with security, there's a whole multitude of different applications that you could implement into the security hardening process. But for now, I would say that these 6 are top of the tier. So let's go on to the next slide. And George, I do believe, yep, that's the last one.
Okay. I will defer to Gordon, Jen, and the team at First Foundation, see if there are any questions that came in through the chat feature. I'll take a look at, and if there are any subsequent follow-up questions that you have of myself or the coalition team, you can feel free to reach out to us. There's an email listed there. Preferably, I would imagine you would probably be more apt to go through your broker partner, in this case, First Foundation, who we partner with. So with that, I'll open it up for any questions. I'll stop presenting now, but
Thanks, George. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, if you want to pop them in the chat, and I'm happy to pass it along to George. In the meantime, while we're just waiting for that, I'll just start that off, George, if you don't mind. When First Foundation was going through our quoting process and setting up our policy with Coalition, one of the things that we found really helpful was the risk assessment that you do at the time of quoting. So I was just wondering if maybe you could chat about that a little bit and give the attendees a little bit of information in regards to what that risk assessment looks like and why it's important and why you felt the need to present this at the time of quote.
Oh, absolutely. This is a great document. It's really the summation of our proprietary scan of the technological infrastructure of the policyholder or client at that point. We do offer to our broker partners at the time of quotation with no obligation to place the business with Coalition. But really, it's a very substantive report. It's upwards of 20 some odd pages. And there is some technical jargon. There's some technical aspects to the report, but really it encapsulates and provides to the broker and the client insight as to our findings from a technological perspective. So we look at their cyber risk hygiene. We look at any vulnerabilities they may have and whether they be critical, high, or and needing immediate remediation and attention, or just general housekeeping items that are more on the medium to low end of the spectrum. We look at any sensitive information. So this may be your client, or in this case, someone on today's call, or your employees, either current or past, that may have had their username and passwords exposed on third-party breach. We capture up to 5 years back on that. Why is that important? Well, you may want to consider, if it has happened to you or employees of your firm, a more robust password management protocol, like some guidance around when they should be using their business email address on third-party sites, making sure that the passwords themselves are robust. They're alphanumeric, special characters, that sort of thing, because we also share in the assessment itself the composition of passwords. So there's why is that a concern to you as a client? Well, if there is current or former employees' emails and passwords exposed in the dark web and available, obviously adversaries can try to use that information to try to gain access to your server or your system. So further, they could also use that personal information that may be available based on third-party breaches to have set the perfect foundation, if you will, for a social engineering campaign. So there's a lot of information contained into this assessment. In full disclosure, if you were to get an equivalent comparable assessment from a third party, we were advised it would be anywhere from $2,500 to $3,000 per report. This is free to our business partners and their respective clients or prospects, and there's just a wealth of information there.
Great. Thank you so much, George. Okay, we have a few questions here, so I'll just start out with Shauna's. She says, what happens to our data if we get hacked? We have been hacked and we did get back to work within 2 hours, but where did their stuff go?
I can take that. I guess my first question is what kind of hack it was. If we are talking about, a typical ransomware attack, Sometimes, actually most times, the large majority of times, ransomware attackers are only interested in encrypting the data, and they're not interested in stealing the data. But since end of 2019, there has been a couple of groups that have hopped on the bandwagon of data exfiltration, which creates that dual prong crisis of data theft as well as data encryption. So when they do take the data, it's often quite a large quantity. So we're looking in the gigabytes and sometimes in the low terabytes even. And they are often quite selective in terms of what they would take. So they would, once they get onto the network, one of the first things they do is what we call content reconnaissance. So they would look for data that responds to interesting information. Social insurance numbers, as I say, things of value. Once that gets exfiltrated, they would either pop it onto a server on their own backend or on some sort of file sharing website. And then what they do is they will communicate with you and let you know that that data has been taken. And if you choose not to pay the ransom, they will slowly start to release that data on the dark web. Now, some attackers will just release and expose the data on the public internet as a means to shame the company, the victim that has been breached. Or other attackers would actually take that data and auction it off to other attackers. So they would set up these auction sites where in order to join, you have to pay like a deposit, and then the auction would continue, and then you either win or lose, and you get your deposit back. So that's why forensic analysis is very important post an incident, excuse me. And that is so that the forensic investigator can figure out exactly what population of data was potentially exfiltrated or taken or accessed by the threat actor.
Great, thanks, Shelley. So Dan Stevens has a couple questions here. His first one is, how do the criminals convince you they will correct things after you pay, and why would you trust them?
Yeah, that's a great question. At the end of the day, these guys are criminals. They're absolutely bad guys, and trust is sort of, it's a fine balance. With these types of enterprises, the criminals do visualize their setup as a business. And if you look on the dark web, there's even like dark web versions of Yelp where you could rate the service and rate the efficacy of the ransomware tool as well as its decryption capabilities. So because of the whole business mindset, if an attacker doesn't turn over the decryption key or decryption tool post payment, then it's a ding on their reputation. And if word gets out that even if you pay this attacker group, they're not going to hand you over the decryption software, then that looks really bad on them, and they could potentially lose out on future business. Some of these enterprises, they even have like really interesting formats. Like some of the groups have like a 30-day money back warranty, where if you rehack yourself accidentally within 30 days, they'll just give you a free tool. Some of them have like help desk services, penetration testing services, things like that. So they really do visualize their enterprise as like a business. When I've probably overseen in the realm of like 500, 600 ransom payments. And there's only been about 2 instances where we paid a ransom and didn't get the tool. And in both of those cases, there was some like extenuating circumstances, one of which was the client took way too long to get back to the attacker, and the attacker's communication channel had closed. So the issue with paying a ransom, or the fear around paying a ransom, is not so much that they'll take the money and run. That almost never happens. The bigger fear is that they'll give you a decryption tool that just is very clunky and doesn't work well. Because you have to remember that these criminals, these hackers, they're not like Google software engineers. There's somebody sitting in a garage, doing ransomware as a side gig. So likely it's going to have some issues, and then we'll have some data corruption. But very rarely would we run into an issue of them not turning over the decryption tool. And sometimes they would also re-extort. But yeah, trust is hard earned. It doesn't come by easy in this world.
Great, thanks, Shelley. And Dan's second question was if you know anything about the Colonial Pipeline ransom situation in the US right now.
Yeah, that's a great question too. I must say I haven't followed it for like 2-3 days. But last I checked, it was a big, so the type of family that this ransomware falls into is called the big game hunter family, and they are associated with really, really large ransoms. Not too much is known at the moment in terms of exactly like how that ransomware got into the network, but if we follow like typical behavioral patterns of this attacker group, likely it started with human error. So if we had to like just guess what happened, it was probably somebody clicked on a phishing email that led to the installation of a malicious backdoor, and then through the backdoor, the attackers were able to gain remote access, do their reconnaissance, and set up the ransomware deployment encryption event. Ransomware it's getting more sophisticated, but by and large, for the most part, the steps that are involved in a ransomware attack is not too complicated. It's like just a couple of steps, and regardless of the entity, regardless of which company it is, for the most part, like it's industry agnostic, and obviously the bigger the entity that they're hitting, the larger the ransom, so it makes them more attractive targets. But it's quite scary to think that literally it could be something as simple as someone clicking on a bad link or a bad phishing email.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Shelley. One other question here so far. To which extent does the policy cover files or losses? So files stored on an individual computer, files stored on a third party, such as G Drive or Zoho Drive, and then stored customer data on a third party application, such as an e-commerce site.
Dale, you want to take that one, or?
Yeah, no, definitely. So let's start with the first part. Individual computers, if you're talking about personal computer, it depends on if that computer is being used to perform work on behalf of the insured, which of course we're seeing a lot more of now with the work from home situation that we all dealt with during the pandemic. Same goes for work. Yeah, I mean, that's a work computer that you're using for to perform work tasks. So does it cover those losses? Yes, it'll help. This goes to the digital asset restoration piece that we talked about on one of the slides. We can help you either find vendor that would be able to help you on recovering those files, possibly restoring them from backups, if needed, trying to recreate those. And so we do have some vendors and stuff that will take care of that. And then on the second piece, G Drive, yeah, this is again, it's your files that you're working on behalf of the policyholder, the company itself. Then yes, those type of things are covered. I think, well, I don't know if it's Shelley, but CIR has dealt with trying to recover files through G Drive and other type of third-party apps such as that. And then stored customer data on a third-party app. That depends, again, on the different policies. There's some different endorsements out there, but generally, yes, we do. If they are handling it, I believe we have language that says, as part of a contract, that type of information would be covered if for some reason they had an issue on the third-party app.
Great, thanks, Dale. And one other question here was actually from Gord, and he was hoping you could maybe tell us a little bit more about how this standalone solution differs from riders that are found on a typical commercial insurance policy, potential add-on benefits such as training that I know we here at First Foundation have taken advantage of ourselves. So if you guys could speak to that, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I could take that one. Good question, Gordon. You didn't tee it up. We didn't set this one up, but I can assure you that from my experience, I've been in this business quite some time, particularly here in Canada, cyber is still deemed to be an emerging risk, although it has been around for quite some time. So much of the business we've placed, and we've grown exponentially since we launched here in Canada, is really new business to our broker partners. They may be existing P&C clients, but new cyber purchasers. And that that could be a number of reasons. I mean, this subject's been broached year after year, and again, from my time on the broker side, I can lay claim to the fact that it is a difficult, dare I say, sell. Most purchasers are already in the midst of a hard market and having upward pressure on pricing on their mandatory coverages, whether there be their homeowners, their private auto, or their commercial P&C accounts. So cyber may not be viewed as an immediate need. Having said that, and as referenced throughout this presentation, and we all see the headlines, it's becoming more and more pervasive. I like to remind our broker partners that it's equally important to protect one's digital assets as it is their physical assets. And unfortunately, that there are markets, traditional carriers out there that offer up an ad hoc attached cyber endorsement, if you will, to an existing P&C package policy. The problem with that is they're very limited in scope in terms of their coverage. It's for nominal premium. And I like to think that the concern I have is that there's this false sense of security on the part of the policyholder. They feel they have coverage when in fact they don't have much of coverage at all when it comes time to dealing with a cyber incident. I would much rather they consider a robust standalone cyber policy, and that's not just Coalition. There are other carriers out there, but this idea about just adding an endorsement to your existing P&C policy is not enough in the event of a claim. So that's my personal opinion. That's open for debate, but that's how I view it. The second part of the question, yes, we certainly have an unparalleled value proposition at Coalition, inclusive in the premium you pay for your cyber policy. We afford our policyholders a full suite of cybersecurity tools and risk management services that are offered to our insureds at no additional cost. And they range from things like security awareness training through our partnership with Curricula. So they walk through for our policyholders and their employees, simulated spear phishing attacks, what to look for, what not to do, and so forth. We also have partnerships with companies like Malwarebytes that offer ransomware prevention services, Cloudflare through DDoS denial of service, and a whole host of other value-added services that are inclusive in the premium you pay for at Coalition. Again, I like to remind our broker partners that we're not here selling a policy. We're here truly to mitigate and or remediate a loss if you're unfortunate enough to have one. So we provide risk management services that accompanying our policy. And again, the fine folks at First Foundation can provide you more marketing material that we offer up our policyholders if that's of interest to you.
Thanks, George. One last question, it looks like here from Dwayne. He's wondering if Coalition has any experience with handling major civil cases involving breach of client information.
I can take that one. And yes, Coalition does, whether it was while, the claims team, whether it's with Coalition themselves or our previous life, but we've all worked in the cyber insurance industry for many years now and have dealt with major civil cases multiple times.
Excellent, thank you. So if there's no other questions, I'm just going to take a minute here to thank you all for joining us, and a huge thank you to George and Dale and Shelley over at the Coalition team for taking the time to explain all of this to us today. Of course, a big thank you to our sponsors, Slate Insurance and Automatica IT Solutions. To summarize, we just believe that a proactive approach is the only way to approach cyber risk. Having a great IT solutions and a proper insurance plan will provide you some great peace of mind in today's marketplace. For more information on any of this, to get a quote or to talk about some IT solution services, I would encourage you all to reach out to Daryl Huff at Automatica and myself at First Foundation, and we're going to be providing you all with contact information right after the webinar. So with that, I want to end today's session. Thank you so much to everybody for joining us, and we look forward to chatting with you further.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you.